Hello again. Today's short video is about prejudice and does fit in with previous videos that we've seen about groups and people's attributes. Imagine, if you will, that you are a hunter-gatherer and you are sitting on a rock having a well-earned rest from throwing rocks at mammoths, and suddenly in the bush behind you you hear a noise. You have no idea what this is. It could be a rabbit, it could, but perhaps it's a tiger or a poisonous snake. Well, common sense in that case dictates that you assume the worst. It's a question of self-preservation. You get up and you move. And this mistrust of the unknown is perhaps one of the roots of prejudice. Very small children are very wary of people they don't know. They soon become accustomed to them, but their first reaction is apparently a certain fear of this completely unknown person. Again, it's a natural human reaction. Now, in the video about Dunbar's theory, we talked about group sizes and maximum amount of people you could know. As the group moves from just the individual to his close friends, to his a wider circle of acquaintances, and extends outwards, the level of trust naturally declines as you move further out. Now, a group can be cohesive on a much bigger scale. For example, an entire country can form a cohesive group, but this only tends to happen in very, very special circumstances. If you take, for example, a World Cup final, let's say between Spain and Holland, well, most of the Spanish, perhaps with the exception of some Catalans and Basques, most of the Spanish will identify themselves as Spanish. For that one football match and perhaps a few days of celebration afterwards, then the nation has a binding principle, and one can identify with other people who are Spanish as opposed to those unfortunates who are not in the case. This can also happen in war, although there are some studies that suggest that in fact in wartime internal aggressive behaviour actually increases. This is something I have discussed in one of the electronic books available on Amazon. Now, prejudice is actually acceptable in many environments. It is often the basis of jokes, for example. If we start a joke with an Englishman, an Irishman and a Scotsman walk into a bar, then we immediately, I think, have a picture of what those people are like. Excuse me. But that often is completely harmless, and to an extent, I believe we all do it, and we can even make jokes about ourselves based on these assumptions that people make. But when people feel under threat for some reason, when they feel that the close group that they belong to, or perhaps just themselves as an individual, is under threat, we look naturally for somebody to blame. Now, the reason for whatever problem we have might be absolutely nothing to do with any one person or any one group of people. It could be simply economic circumstances or illness or a myriad of other things. But we tend to seek someone to blame, an agent, if you like. Our hunter-gatherer has assumed that the noise in the bush is an animal, an agent, and an agent which means him harm. But perhaps it was the wind, perhaps something had shifted, and we don't really know. But the tendency is to try and find an agent for our misfortunes. In perhaps a more religious world, then it became fairly easy to lay the blame for all illnesses and maladies on Satan, and all benefits and so forth on God. But perhaps now we're moving into a world where the religious view of life is not as important as it once was, or not as fundamental, perhaps is a better way of putting it. So we tend to try and find somebody or some group of people to blame. And scapegoats, if you like, are available. There are people who, through the colour of the skin, their sexual orientation, whatever it may be, there are people who are noticeably different from us. These are different, they're not part of our in-group, so we can ascribe qualities to them that are to blame for the problems that we have. Now, this may or may not be reasonable. Usually it's not, because all of these groups of people, whether it's a group of Chinese people, a group of black people, a group of lesbians, all of these people are individuals. There are, of course, good Chinese and bad Chinese. There are greedy Chinese and there are generous Chinese. There are Chinese who are good at business and there are Chinese who are not. But what we tend to do is to make a generalization which then applies to the entire group, where we don't differentiate between the members of that group. Even though we at one level or another know that each one of these groups is composed of individuals. Now, in certain circumstances, there are cases where we can take a whole group and say, I do not like what this group is doing. This could happen in the case of war, or white South Africans in the days of apartheid, or perhaps Israel's expansion into Palestinian territory. You can find a reason to dislike what a group of people is doing, but this is usually, almost always, a political question, not a question of individual qualities. You might dislike Israeli policy in the West Bank, for example, but most people would not then say all Israelis are bad. They would perhaps know some Israelis who are perfectly fine people, and I'm sure most are. Some are not. But that's true of absolutely any group at all. We also tend to believe that groups that we don't belong to are necessarily in competition with the group we do. This could be competition for jobs, competition for a mate, but for some reason we believe that, you know, these people are coming here and they're going to take my job. Well, these people, you can normally substitute any one object of prejudice for these people. It could be blacks or Chinese or whatever it is. But these people, as such, are simply looking for jobs. They're not actually going to take your job. An individual might take your job, but a group is not going to take your job. And with this impulse to categorize and stereotype, we tend wrongly, and I think with a moment's thought, we know it's wrong, we tend wrongly to ascribe characteristics to anybody who is a member of that group. From personal experience, memory might not serve me particularly well here, but I remember I was in Leicester in England, and for some reason needed a bed for the night. It doesn't matter why, but a friend of mine, a guy whose family was originally from Pakistan, invited me to crash out at his place, where he was living with his girlfriend, who I knew, and another guy who I'd never met. And this guy, also of Pakistani origin, turned up in the middle of the evening whilst Tarlo and I were having a couple of beers. And he was absolutely furious. He did not want me in his house. He had absolutely nothing to say to me. He was furious with Tarlo. It was a very awkward evening. And I don't think, because I recognise to a privileged group, I don't think that I've ever, before or since, seen myself as an object of prejudice. But there was no way to talk to this guy. He didn't even speak to me in English, although according to Tarlo he spoke English perfectly well. In fact, he didn't speak to me at all. And I've noticed recently on, for example, Facebook, that in the United Kingdom there seems to be a lot of prejudice against refugees. Well, refugees are, by definition, desperate for security. Britain actually does not accept that many refugees. The total amount of refugees in the British population is 0.26%. So as a group, these groups of refugees from whichever country they originally come from are not going to be stealing British jobs. In fact, when they arrive, there seems to be a myth going around that's very hard to stop, but there seems to be a myth that they step off their rubber dinghy on the British coast, immediately welcomed with open arms, given a lot of money, and a council house. Well, this is simply not true. A refugee is an asylum seeker when he arrives. He is registered, she is registered as an asylum seeker. In Britain, they are not entitled to income support, they're not entitled to housing benefit, and they're certainly not entitled to a council house. They're accommodated in well, housing of different qualities somewhere, limited as to where they can go, and have to start a process of having their application for leave to stay studied by the Home Office. Now, whilst this process is going on, and it can take years, they are given the exceptionally generous sum of £36.95 a week. £36.95 a week is hardly enough to eat on. I mean, basically it isn't enough to eat on. If you have a child under one with you, then the government would chip in another £5 a week. But these are not a threat to the security of the British nation, the economic security or the political security of the British nation. These are desperate people. So why is there so much prejudice against what is a minuscule number, a number of people that most people in Britain will never see? It's in fact completely ununderstandable. Imagine that, for example, Iceland decided to kick out all its university professors, and its university professors decided to cross to the north coast of Scotland by boat. Would we feel the same way about these highly educated people? Highly educated people who in the main speak excellent English? No. So I'm sure we wouldn't. So the prejudice against refugees is entirely based on the fact that they are not like us. They're from Somalia, they're from Iraq, they're from, I don't know, the Near East, Syria, the Yemen, and these people are desperate. We need, I think, to stop in generalizing about people. The only way we can fight prejudice is to listen to the people that are the objects of prejudice. That way we may discover that in fact they are just like ourselves. Thank you for listening. It's been a bit of a polemic today, I apologise for that. It's something I feel quite strongly about. Stay safe, and I'll be with you again soon.